All right, I've already given you an introduction, and like I said, no introduction could cover all the things this guy has done and is doing, but let's give a warm word of welcome to Dr. Dean Addisty.
Well, thank you. It's great to be back at Crossview. I see a lot of familiar faces. You can't help but also think of the faces that aren't here tonight, who've gone ahead of us to heaven. I was thinking about some of those people during your time small group. I remember when I was announcing that I was leaving, everybody was saying, this is back in the 1990s, it won't be the same. And I like to respond by saying, no, it won't be. It'll be better. And it has been better. You've been so blessed with Pastor Steve, Pastor Toby, and staff. And this is one of the strongest churches, I'm so thrilled to say, in the Synod. And it's a pace-setter church, technologically and otherwise. It's just a thrill to be back here and with all of you. Well, full disclosure, Steve knows this, I've got an hour's worth of material for you. And we only have half an hour. So you may get frustrated by the speed at which I move through this lecture. But we're going to move at light speed through this. To introduce the course just a little bit, the Good Life in Christ, Ethics for the Christian Disciple. We're going to be looking at different schools of ethics as they show up in the Bible. So you don't have to remember this to get into heaven, but tonight it's the deontological ethical system. We'll talk about that. You don't have to remember that word at all, but it's a system of ethics that's there in the Bible. We'll also look at virtue ethics, and that's just what it sounds like. The virtues that need to attend us as disciples of Jesus Christ. And we'll track that through the Bible as well. We'll look at identity ethics, how your identity drives your understanding of what's right and what's wrong. We'll look at consequentialist ethics, the importance to think about, if I do this, what are the consequences of my action? So we're going to be taking a look at these huge schools of ethics that end up showing themselves all over scriptures. And then we're going to take a look in the latter part of the course at our culture and how the culture, frankly, is very much in conflict with what the scriptures have to say about what's right and what's wrong. And then to put those two together, how we as Christians navigate ourselves in this culture. So that's what we'll be doing together. So we're going to start tonight, as I said, with divine commands, which is a part of deontological ethics. And divine commands, what do you think of as soon as I say that? What do you think of? 10 Commandments. Yeah, somebody said thou shalt not. Right, yeah, that's what it is. So we're really talking about duty here. And that's not a word that's used much in the church because it feels like a legalistic word. I was a Boy Scout. On my honor, I will do my duty to God and my country and will obey the Scout laws. I will help other people at all times. I can't believe I'm reciting this. And I will keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight at the end, morally straight. Some of you were scouts too. But on my honor, I will do my duty. So when we talk about divine commands or 10 commandments, we're talking about a duty to obey. So the deon in deontology, deon is a Greek word, it means duty. So deontological ethics deals with absolute precepts, absolute commands that I am duty-bound to obey. And that's where the 10 Commandments come in. They fall into the category of divine commands. So in ancient Greece, with the guys like Aristotle and Plato, they talked about the gods and the laws of the gods, and very much were understood the idea of duty to commands. The guy that's most famous in philosophical ethics for this was a Lutheran guy who was raised in a Lutheran church, Immanuel Kant. And during the Enlightenment, when reason took over, Kant taught that each of us has within us a good will to do our duty, as long as we understand that our duty is to a command that holds true for everybody. Do you follow that? So he said, you have it within you as an individual person, to use your reason to come up with what he called a categorical imperative, which meant this applies to everybody in this situation. So if you're wondering what's right and what's wrong, you got to figure out, well, if I did this, would that be okay for everybody to do that in this situation? That's a categorical imperative. And so I'm not going to kill this person, because we can't go around having people shooting their neighbor just because they feel like shooting their neighbor. So that was Kant, and he's kind of considered the father of deontological ethics. I disagree. God is the originator of deontological ethics. God is the one who gave us the divine commands that we know as the Ten Commandments. And we understand those to be absolute, don't we? That there are some exceptions once in a while, and we'll talk about that. We struggle with some of those commands, but we understand that God has given us divine commands. So the ultimate foundation, this comes from Scott Ray, the ultimate foundation for morality is the revealed will of God, namely the commands of God found in the Scriptures. And that's our premise for tonight, that we believe that we have commands in the Scriptures that reveal God's will for what's right and what's wrong in our lives. All right. So, I want to just introduce you to the Euthyphro dilemma. Once you've heard it, you don't need to remember it either, but it's kind of interesting. This comes from Plato, who has this dialogue between Socrates. You know, Socrates, we don't have any of his writings. Plato gives us as much as we know about Socrates. So Socrates is talking to this young, he's kind of like the kid in class that always had the answers, that you wish would not talk in class. Euthyphro always seemed to have the right answer. So it's in that dialogue between Socrates and Euthyphro, Socrates presents a dilemma. It's called the Euthyphro dilemma, named for that young guy. So he gives us two horns of the dilemma. Is something good because God commands it? So is the commandment, you shall not kill, good because God commands it? Or on the other hand, does God command it because it's good? That's the dilemma. So if you accept A, then the problem is God can give arbitrary commands. If it's good just because God says so, God could command anything. And this is we're not talking about our God, we're talking about the gods back in the Greek world. And if B, then the problem is God being unnecessary for what's good, because the good already existed. You don't need God for the good, see? But it's a phony dilemma. At least for Christians, we don't buy those two options. Because for us, we say goodness is determined not directly by God's commands. We don't just obey the fifth commandment because it's a commandment. We don't just sin against the commandment. We sin against God, the God who is gracious, the God who is full of love for us, the God who called us to be his own, the God who's shown us what it means to be holy, the God who's shown us what it means to forgive. That's the God we obey. So when Christians obey the commandments, they don't do it just because the commandments are good. They don't do it just because God is good and God's in control. They do it because we have a relationship with God. Do you see that? And it's crucial because it sets us apart from the ancient Greeks. Not that you care that much about being set apart from the ancient Greeks. But it does. It says we obey these precepts, these commands, because the God who gave them to us is a God we love and who's proven himself worthy of our love. So that throughout the Scriptures, you end up getting these wonderful statements of who God is and what God is like. The preface to the commandments, look at this. Before the first commandment in Exodus 20, and God spoke all these words, the Ten Commandments, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. So before he even gives the first commandment, he makes it clear, I'm that God who brought you out of slavery. That's why you're going to listen to my commandments. That's why you're going to obey my commandments, because I'm that God. And that's all over the place. So that in the Scriptures, you shall be holy, because I, the Lord, your God, am holy. We strive for holiness because we believe in a God who is holy, that is separate and perfect and set apart, just as we are. Or Jesus saying, I wish you hadn't said it, but he did say it, you shall be perfect. as your Father in heaven isn't perfect. So we find our obedience to God's commandments rooted in this God that we know is holy, is perfect. And that's what moves us to obedience to the commandments. So let's set the commandments a little bit into context. Before we do that, though, some issues with divine commands. And I think I may have reversed these from your study guide, but it doesn't make any difference. So sometimes we have problems with the commandments. So what do I do when a divine command seems to go against God's character? So when God seems to be telling me to do something that I know isn't right from everything else he said to me. So the example there that's always used is Genesis 22, Abraham and Isaac. Abraham, take your son and kill him, offer him as a sacrifice. What? So if you've ever run into that situation where you feel called by God to do something and it doesn't seem right, I know Soren Kierkegaard said, God sometimes calls us to adventure, even to the absurd, and sometimes he does. So that's one of the dilemmas with the commandments. Another one that also you can look at your study guide, slavery in Leviticus, the fact that God seems to allow for slavery, genocide, go out and destroy this whole nation. Those are things that run counter to God's nature, and yet sometimes it seems we are confronted by that. And the other issue with the commandments is often, what do I do when two divine commands seem to conflict? So you've got Rahab in the book of Joshua, where the spies are hiding away in her house, remember? And they come looking for the spies, the Canaanites, and where are they? And she says they've gone, they're probably outside the gate already. No, they're not. They're hiding in her house. She lies to save their lives. So what do you do when you've got a conflict in the commandments? And she chose to lie for the sake of saving the lives, and that was repeated again and again. Think of how many Jews were saved by people lying and saying during World War II that they're not here. Yes, they were. So sometimes here you follow Luther's suggestion that sometimes we just have to sin boldly in choosing what we feel is the right path. All right, so let's look a little bit at, I wanted to ask you to think about when you were growing up about your obedience to the commands that your parents gave you. What drove that obedience? Did any of you have a parent say, a parent would say, do this, and you'd say, no, I'm not going to do it, why should I? And then the next response was what? Because I said so. Exactly. I think we've all been there, haven't we? Yeah. And there was a lot of truth in that. If you get underneath that parent had sort of earned the right to give those commands, had earned the right through love and sacrifice and constancy and all the things that parents do for kids. Because I said so seems to work. So I think some of the secrets to obedience to the commandments are rooted in our relationship with the Lord. That's one, because he said so, because this is that God who loves me, who gave his only son for me. That's why I'm going to obey the commandments. And it also means, and I get upset with this sometimes because I think it's not about breaking a commandment. Well, I broke the second commandment because I really cussed it up. I'm just using this as an example. Really cussed it up. You didn't break the commandment as much as you broke God's heart. So that breaking a commandment is an offense against God and against his heart. And that's what we mean by the parental concept of obedience. All right. The commandments are found in Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5. They're often called the 10 words. The Greek for that is deca and logos, so they're often called the Decalogue, if you've heard that before, the 10 words. Other nations at this time had law codes, so it wasn't just Israel. But what's interesting to me is that out of the gate, God saw Israel needed some laws. So they're 3 months out of Egypt, and that's when it all happens. That's when the commandments are given, and all the civil laws, all the ceremonial laws, that's all dropped down on Israel because you can't have a nation without laws. I'll say that again. You can't have a nation without laws. You can't have a nation without laws that are enforced. All right? And God knew that Israel was not going to be a nation without laws. So 3 months in, 2 million strong out in the desert, he drops all these laws on the nation of Israel. And it's interesting that the commandments are all given in the second person singular. It's not all of you all, if you're from Texas, so you all kind of thing. It's you, it's singular, but it doesn't mean the individual. This is so interesting to me. I don't know why, but it's the sense of you, Israel, you, the nation that God has chosen. I'm giving you these laws, you, Israel. So it's that sense of belonging. And we're going to look at that in identity ethics. Where you belong, the connections you have really matter in your ethics. And God said, you, Israel. It'd be like today saying, we, the United States, and we need more of that, don't we? Our identity as a nation, not as a tribe within a nation, but as a nation. We follow these precepts and these rules. So the first singular is kind of confusing to some people, or the second singular is confusing to some people. It probably shouldn't be, because it's about the nation. All right. It's also, the Ten Commandments are given as a covenant, that is a treaty between God and the nation of Israel. And I listed the covenants in the scriptures just to review for you. The covenant with Noah, do you remember one of the pieces of the covenant? It's there on the screen. The rainbow. God sets his bow in the sky. I set my bow, not rainbow. I set my bow. It looks like a bow. It's shaped like a bow. No longer will I make war on you through a flood. That's Noah's covenant. Among other things, too, whoever sheds a man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. That's a part of that covenant. As well. Also eating meat. It looks like before Noah, we were all vegetarians. But after the flood, we're eating meat. Isn't that interesting? Check it out, okay? The Abrahamic covenant, that's all over those chapters in Genesis. I'll bless you to bless the nations. The circumcision part of that. The Mosaic covenant, that's the Ten Commandments that are part of that covenant. The Davidic covenant with David. You want to build me a house? You want to build me a temple, David? No, you're not going to. Your son will. But I'll build a house through you, and through your house will come the Messiah. That's the Davidic covenant. And then finally, the new covenant that arrives with Jesus Christ. That's a whole different kind of promise that's sealed in the atoning work of Jesus Christ. So this falls into the area of covenant theology. All right. There are three kinds of law in the covenant given to Moses: the civil law, the ceremonial, and the moral. Now, this might disturb some of you, and maybe not, I don't know, but we say that the first two kinds of law given in the Bible are not binding on us. So the civil laws of Israel have to do with if your ox gores my ox, what happens to you and your ox? If one of the laws was if a son curses his father or mother, you shall take him out and stone him. So in the civil law of Israel, there were 36 capital crimes. 36 deserving capital punishment. Aren't you glad that we say that's not binding on us? That was their civil law. We have our own civil statutes. The ceremonial law was how you slay an animal for the Day of Atonement, what to do on the Day of Atonement, Passover, all of that. And we say that's not binding. Why not? Because Christ has fulfilled, exactly, has fulfilled all the ceremonial laws. Those were a shadow of his coming, and now he's fulfilled that. So what's left is the moral law and basically the Ten Commandments. Commandments 1 to 3 focus on your relationship with the Lord. Commandments 4 through 10 focus on your relationship with others. Three functions of the Ten Commandments, of the moral law, as we said, are first to set boundaries in our behavior, a curb, You might remember this from confirmation class, right? So they set boundaries in our behavior. You can go this far, but not over this. A mirror, it shows us our sin. That's the primary function of the law. The Ten Commandments are meant to show you. Without the Ten Commandments, you wouldn't know you needed a Savior, right? So, lex semper accusat. The law always accuses. It shows me my sin and drives me to my Savior. That's the chief function of the Ten Commandments. And then the rule is it teaches us right and wrong. It teaches us this is what's right, this is what's wrong. I know you can't read that very well, but it just shows you how we can't get together on the Ten Commandments. Come on, really. If you look way over on the right, that's us. So unlike the rest of, whether it's Judaism or Reformed or the Orthodox Church, we don't include, you shall not make for yourself an idol, as the second commandment. We take that in with the first commandment. Do you see the bigger square on the far right? So then where do we pick up another commandment? You have to go all the way down and see that we have two commandments on coveting. It's kind of ridiculous to me. Is it the fact that Lutherans and Catholics are more likely to covet what other people have, so we need two commandments on? It just upsets me that why can't we get this right? It just seems to me all people, Jews and Christians alike, ought to be able to at least agree how to number the commandments. But we can't. So that's what we end up with. We end up with 9 and 10, two commandments on coveting, and we pretty much take in what the others say, including the Jewish people who were closer to this than any of us were. You shall not make for yourself an idol. I personally lean toward having the second commandment that the Jewish folks have. That I think, because singling out the making of an idol, I think is very, very helpful in our culture right now. But anyway, we haven't been able to number the commandments and agree on them. So in the 7 minutes we have, I'm going to race you through the Ten Commandments, and we'll get as far as we can. And I apologize for this. So you shall have no other gods. You'd expect you shall have no other gods what? Before me. The new version of these came out in 2017 for the LCMS, and it dropped before me because you shall have no other gods before me might say, don't put on any gods before me, but you can go ahead and have other gods if you want. So they've gone with just you shall have no other gods, and I think that's a good decision. So we have to fold into this, and by the way, don't make an idol out of anything. And I think Lutherans traditionally have folded that into this commandment. So again, look at what Luther does in his explanation. We should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. He places it in the relationship we have with the Lord. We should fear, love, and trust. It's all about relationship, the Ten Commandments. It's not just about some sort of a duty I have to obey because God said it. It's this God said it. So forbids placing loyalty to anyone or anything above or next to God. Encourages uncompromised faithfulness. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Luther's explanation, we should fear and love God so that we do not curse, swear, use satanic arts, lie, or deceive by his name, but call upon his name in every trouble, pray, praise, and give thanks. Sorry about that. Let's pretend that's not there. Forbidden is using God's name in an empty way. To curse, to lie under oath, to deceive, the OMG that we use now, not a good thing, not a good thing. Encourages the use of God's name in prayer, praise, and thanksgiving. I love the benediction we use at the end of our services. A lot of people don't know this was given to Moses to give to Aaron. The Lord bless you and keep you. But notice 3 times the Yahweh, the divine name of the Lord that Jews won't say. So shall they put my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them. So when your pastors give you that benediction, you're getting designer labeled. You're getting the name of the Lord put on you as you move out into the world. It's a great, great concept that God had of the use of his name. Remember the Sabbath day. to keep it holy. God rested on the seventh day, so do we. We should fear and love God, that we do not despise preaching in his word. Look at Van Gogh's rest from work there. The need to budget your time in a way that you rest adequately. But more than that, that seventh day, or at least a day on the weekend, that becomes like an eighth day and gets you ready for the next week. So working without rest, neglecting worship is forbidden. Encourages regular worship and observance of a day of rest. This is also Van Gogh. That's one way to do it, I guess, is to get your sleep in church. Van Gogh, I don't know how many of you know, I'm a big Van Gogh fan. He wanted to be a missionary and actually wrote lots of sermons. His dad was a missionary. I have some of his sermons, not the originals, but I have his sermons, and they're amazing. They're just full of pictures and images, so you can just tell he's an artist. But I thought that'd be fun to put up there. One of my favorite paintings, the Angelus, the tradition in France, in Alsace, that when 5 o'clock came and the sun began to go down, the church bells would ring, and people would rest with the Lord at the end of the workday at sunset. It's just a beautiful, beautiful painting. All right. Jesus said the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So we're going to pick corn on the Sabbath, whether you like it or not. We're hungry. And I'm going to heal on the Sabbath too. Well, let's not get crazy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long, that it may go well with you. The only commandment with promise, Deuteronomy 5. Fear and love God so that we don't despise or anger our parents and other authorities, but honor them, serve and obey them, love and cherish them. So disrespect, hatred, disobedience of parents and others in authority. On the positive side, honoring, serving, loving, cherishing, and obeying parents and others in authority. Really significant in terms of God programming his creation to have these orders of creation, like marriage, like family, like government. That's the way he structured his creation. And that's why we honor those structures that he's put in place. You shall not murder. A lot. Jesus recasts this, that he talks about even hating your brother is tantamount to murder. John says the same thing. We should not hurt nor harm our neighbor in his body, but help support him in every physical need. Aren't Luther's explanations cool? I just think they're so simple and so right on in terms of the meaning of the commandment. So here, assault, willful taking of human life, hatred, anger leading to violence. I would add abortion, a lot going on right now with that in the Supreme Court, euthanasia, suicide, capital punishment, holding life sacred, encourages the help and physical support of others that we're so grateful for these first responders that illustrate what that looks like for us. All right, I'm going to make it through all 10. Is that okay? Okay, all right. Adultery, he who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. I'm no longer a full-time pastor, but I'm sure, Pastor Wheeler, you've experienced this. I've watched too many people lose everything because of adultery. It does not make sense. I guess that's enough said. You've heard it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery. Who was the president who got into trouble because he confessed it? Jimmy Carter, yeah. He confessed that how did he say? I committed adultery many times. Whoa, yeah. in my heart, lustfully, yeah. Sixth commandment, fear and love God that would lead a sexually pure and decent life. Husband and wife, love and honor each other. Max Beckman's depiction of the woman caught in adultery. You shall not commit adultery, forbidden are sex outside of marriage, fornication and adultery, pornography, unbiblical divorce, encourages sexual purity in word and action, honoring the sanctity of marriage. I couldn't believe that Saul Bellow quote, fidelity is for phonographs. Thanks so much for your wisdom, Saul. You shall not steal. Do not take your neighbor's money or possessions. Get them in a dishonest way, but help him to improve and protect his property and business. Burglary, theft, kidnapping, cheating, fraud. Encourage your generosity in assisting neighbors in maintaining and improving their property and business. Eighth commandment, not bearing false witness against your neighbor, not telling lies, betraying people, slandering them, hurting their reputation, gossip, but speaking well of everyone, explaining everything in the kindest way. My dad always said, if you can't say something nice about somebody, don't say anything at all. And he lived by that. Forbidden our false testimony, lying, slander, gossip, speaking ill of others. Encouraged our truthful testimony and speaking well. What you say about others doesn't define them, it defines you. Jesus said, let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. And finally, the 9th and 10th commandments, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. So we're not to scheme to get our neighbor's inheritance or house. And the 10th commandment, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And while we're talking about your wife, let's talk about your servants and your ox and your donkey and everything else that belongs to your neighbor. I think it would be good to talk about spouse here rather than wife, but that's how it's translated. So we don't entice or force away our neighbor's wife, workers, or animals. I think that mainly has to do, both commandments, with materialism and the tendency to let that lead toward discontentedness, not being content with what God has given you, and making things more important than people. So when Reagan was president, there was a point where they were going to put out a neutron bomb. Does anybody remember the neutron bomb? It was going to destroy people. It would kill people, but leave all the buildings standing. And it didn't last very long, the idea, but it was out there, and it was stopped. But that's a classic example of things more important than people that this commandment, I think, addresses. Well, it's Jesus who goes deeper to the heart with many of these commandments and just says you can break these commandments just in your heart. It's not just about behavior. And then he summarizes the commandments by saying what I said at the beginning, that the first of the commandments, the first 3, deal with our love for God, and the rest of the commandments deal with our love for the neighbor. And then that's basically where he says it in Matthew 22:35 through 40. So these are the take-homes. I'll give you 2 or 3 take-homes each week. My obedience to God's commands is rooted in our relationship of trust and love. If you take anything from this first time together, that's what I'd like you to remember, that it's not a strict, heartless obedience to commandments. We obey the commandments because they come from a God that's proven himself over and over again. And even when we fail to obey the commandments, he did this with Israel over and over again. He's there with forgiveness for us. Secondly, God's binding moral law sets boundaries on my behavior, shows me my sin. That's the primary purpose, to drive us to a Savior, and continues to teach me right and wrong. We go back to these commandments. I'm amazed to say that a recent survey by Pew Research said that out of evangelical Christians, only 40% could name 3 of the commandments. 40% could name 3 of the commandments out of confessing Christians. Finally, my obedience to God's commands includes my thoughts, my heart, and my intentions. Well, that's it. You've given me a lot to think about and talk about, and I guess you come back later from your small group, and if you have some questions or comments on any of this, we'll do that together. So have a good time with your small group.